Hi, I'm Sarah Hill, the CEO of Bookstr. We are here today with Dr. Jody Foster and speaking about her book, The Schmuck in My Office. Dr. Jody Foster, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before I get to questions for you, I just want to remind our audience that we are taking your questions and comments as you put them into the thread underneath this cute little video. If you could put your comments in there, we're fielding them live and they are being sent to my phone so that we can give them straight to Dr. Foster as you ask them. So please make sure to do that and continue to do that. We're measuring it by the second. Okay, Dr. Foster, my first question for you is what inspired you to write this book?
So the fact of the matter is that I wasn't inspired to write the book at all. I was asked to write the book. I have a program at Penn for disruptive physicians. And the program did so well at Penn that we began to offer it publicly. And at some point, I was asked to do an alumni interview at Wharton. And so an article ran in Knowledge at Wharton, and within about a week I got a cold call from an agent from William Morris who said, "Would you write a book about this?"
Wow.
And that's how it happened.
Wow, that's awesome. That's like they found you, which means...
Absolutely.
Yeah, that means you must be really hitting a pretty big, interesting point here. Okay, can you tell me about the title, The Schmuck in My Office, because I think it's amazing and hilarious and very eye-catching.
Well, so I can tell you that my family was so horrified by this title, so I'd like to exonerate them of any culpability up front. The name of this book came to me from the people who call me. I, on a regular basis, pick up the phone when a call comes in, and at the other end of the phone, they say, "Jody, I should have called you 10 years ago. I have this jerk in my department," or "I have this schmuck in my office." And the thing about it is that people really don't like direct confrontation. They don't really like to confront uncomfortable topics. And so they just hope that when someone's acting badly, they're just going to stop and it's just going to go away. And of course it never goes like that. And so time passes and managers wait to intervene, or not even managers, any of us wait to intervene. And so by the time an intervention is actually happening, it's laden with so much resentment and frustration that people just get angry and label the bad actors, or whoever they think is the bad actor, a schmuck. Mm-hmm. The other part of it is that, of course, I see part of my job here as leading horses to water. I think that this is a ubiquitous issue. We all have conflict. We can't avoid it. You put two people in a room together and the potential for conflict exists. And I wanted to get that out there. And if I entitled it something like talking, difficult conversations with difficult people, that who would sort of stop for that? But I figured that this might get people to stop for a minute and say, "Oh, that's kind of pretty cool," and take a look and maybe get it out there a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. That's great. We have a question from John. John says, "What's the best way to tell someone they're doing something disruptive or annoying at work?"
So I think that the best thing to do, again, just to get back to a point I already made, early intervention is incredibly key in this. And so I think when someone does something, the best thing to do, if you can do it, is to tell them right then. And if you can't do it right then soon thereafter. But we wait, and we talk to other people about it. We don't talk to the person. And people are amazed when they actually, take my advice and go and say, "I didn't like what you just did." I liken this to when my little boy was in pre-K, and he would have a conflict on the playground, and he would run up to the teacher and say, "Sally's being mean to me," and the teacher would turn him right around and say, "Well, you go tell Sally you don't like that," And I think that we lose that as we grow up, and I think that that's just incredibly important. Call it out when it happens, when you see it. Be direct, be concise, be honest, and communicate with people. Because a lot of times people just don't know. People don't wake up in the morning and say, "You know what, I'm going to be a jackass in the office today." They just don't do that. So, go up and tell them what they did, because chances are they may not know that they offended you.
That's great advice. One of the questions that I have is, in your book you talk about a few different personality types. How did you come up with these different types of personalities? I think there was the robot,
There's 10 types.
Yeah, okay, 10 types.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so as you know, I'm a psychiatrist, so I come at this from a diagnostic standpoint. At this point, I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who've been labeled difficult or disruptive at work. And barring major physical or mental illness, what I have seen time and time and time and time again is that they appear to fall into these 10 major types. And so when I was trying to elucidate this, I thought it was really important to define that these are not diagnoses. The people who are annoying you at work are not sick. They're just bringing their personality traits to work with them. We all have traits, otherwise we would all be beige. You know, if we didn't have traits, then there would be nothing that would differentiate us from one another. It's just that, you know, depending on where you are in the culture, are you in the right culture, are you with the right crowd, sometimes those traits can butt up against the culture and cause trouble.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the power structure has anything to do with certain traits, bringing out certain traits in certain people? And if, say your boss does something that offends you, would you, or not just offends you, but they do something that you think is inappropriate or whatever, do you go and tell that person directly?
So it becomes very hard, and of course, you know, there's no one quick answer for all of these things. But I would advocate, and it's again, I recognize that it's very awkward to tell your boss that they did something you don't like or something wrong. But at the end of the day, I would still advocate it. I still think it's the right thing to do, to be direct and to clarify for people, you know, your rules of engagement.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, we have a question here from Madison. What was your family's reaction to the book?
Well, like I said, they were kind of horrified by the title. The direct translation in Yiddish is not a particularly nice word. So I think they thought it was a little crass. And of course, you know, I'm you know, a relatively upstanding citizen, and so to write a book with this title is, you know, it's a little off color. That said, I think my family was certainly understood the importance of this. Each of my siblings at various times has called me about difficult people in their own offices, and so they understand that this is necessary and that bringing this kind of information to people who can actually put it to use is really important. So I think at the end of the day, they're proud.
Yeah, I'm sure. We have a question from Jody. She says, what do you recommend for positive and healthy ways to vent?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It is.
So I think that, like I said, ideally, if something happens that's upsetting to you and you handle it in the moment, you shouldn't need to vent because you'll take care of it. That said, if you are afraid that you're going to just sort of, you know, blow up if you handle it right at that moment, there is no substitute for dismounting and walking away and taking a minute. Ideally, if there's something really upsetting, if you can even sleep on it so that you can, there's a lot of untangling that happens in sleep, and I think it's sometimes really helpful to just take a step back and take a little time before you risk blowing up. Because what ends up happening is when you blow up, when you vent inappropriately, you feel like you took the low road, and that makes you feel bad. But you know, giving yourself every opportunity to take the high road and be honest and direct is really the best way to go, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. It's somewhat challenging, especially in the moment.
Oh, sure.
That's great advice. We have, what if your comments are received negatively? So say that, right, so yeah.
Interestingly, this just happened to me pretty recently, which is just sort of proof of the pudding that this happens. And I'm supposedly an expert in this, and yeah, you know, I found myself, you know, somebody spoke to me and handled me in such a way that I actually didn't even know what happened. Sometimes these difficult or disruptive interactions are so insidious that you don't even know they happen. I mean, if you come to work and someone punches you in the face, it's quite obvious that you've been handled in a disruptive manner. But if somebody is just passive aggressive or something less overt, it's extremely hard to necessarily parse out what didn't happen. And so it took me actually a couple of days to realize that I felt bullied by this person. And I went and confronted him about it, and he was utterly unreceptive. Absolutely blew up at me. That's not fair, that's not true. And in the moment, I thought that I'd made a mistake, but, you know, afterward, I realized that what I did was, in fact, I defined his boundary for myself, and it absolutely helped me to figure out how to deal with him moving forward, and our relationship has absolutely skyrocketed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's like you learned, like, bullying to him wasn't the same as what bullying was to you.
Well, and also that he really just couldn't tolerate hearing that he did or didn't do it. But I learned something about him. You know, I say this in the book, you know, I'm going to tell you when something bothers me, and you don't have to agree with me, but at least you know where I sit on the matter. And in knowing where I sit, you learn something about me, and we can move forward together.
Yeah, definitely. That's so great. We have, did you have people helping you write the book? Giving you tips, mentioning experiences with office schmucks, or like, did you take examples from real life?
So I took lots and lots and lots of examples from real life. I've had so many of these consults that I have more than enough material. But what I did, because obviously I didn't want anything to be identifiable, is that I took pieces of different stories and I sewed them together. So any one person is sort of a Frankenstein of a bunch of difficult characters in that one type. In terms of how it happened, it's kind of a funny story. When the guy from William Morris called and asked me to write the book, I said, I don't want to write a book. I'm a clinical doctor. I'm an administrator. I don't do that. And he said, no, come on, it'll be wonderful. And I said, I don't like research. I don't want to look stuff up. I don't want to do a bibliography. That sounds horrible. He said, I just want your opinion. I said, you really want me to write a book about the world according to me? You think that's of interest? And he says, absolutely. So I go, I set to task and I write up, the beginnings of a proposal, and I send it to him, and he calls me up. He goes, you know what, Jody, this is great, but you know what it's missing? The research, the history. And I was like, you're kidding me, right? So he did a complete 180 on me, and as luck would have it, at that exact moment in time, the resident, first-year resident who was rotating on my inpatient unit on the other team with me was a professional writer.
Oh, wow.
And so here I had somebody who was just entering to the field and was able to still speak sort of in layman's terms about psychiatry, but was really smart and would develop as a psychiatrist during the writing of this book, and we joined forces.
Oh, wow. That's so great.
Yeah, I was very lucky to
Yeah.
find her.
Well, it was meant to be.
I'd say so.
Okay, we have, what is the craziest story you've heard about the schmuck in the office?
Okay, so you should know that I have spent my career on a locked psychotic adult inpatient unit.
Okay.
So when you talk to me about the craziest story about something, my stories go way beyond anything that you could possibly imagine. Every time I think I've seen it all, something unbelievable happens.
Really?
So, absolutely. So what is the craziest story? Okay, here's a good one. This was somebody sent to me who had made a comment. This was somebody who actually was raised in a major metropolitan area and then up and bought something like 500 acres so that he could hunt. And, as all of us New Yorkers know, it's really not natural to go from the big city to buying 500 acres so that you can hunt. And this guy did not want to know his neighbors. He didn't want any friends. He had lots of dogs. He had a wife who somehow was sort of immune to some of the other stuff. But anyway, he went into work and made a comment. He was talking to somebody about the new gun he had bought, and there was a team, and one of the team members was of a certain ethnicity, and somebody said, "What's this gun for?" And he looks right at the person of this particular ethnicity, and he says, "Well, it's to pick these types off my driveway." And as you can imagine, everybody became incredibly uncomfortable, and the person was sent to me for a consultation, and I was like, why are you sending me a consultation? There's really no cure for this. No one's ever going to feel safe again in this.
Yeah.
And so this is the suspicious character of one of my 10, and they're scary because they can have the potential to get violent.
Yeah.
And so that was a particularly upsetting. And so, all the cultural competency in the world did not appear to be able to help this person, and they were separated from that particular company.
That's so, in a way, I feel so sad for that person. It's like, my God,
Right.
It's insane.
Right.
Very sad.
Well, that's a really good point, because, in all these characters, like I said, they're not diagnoses. They're just sort of threads of traits. And if you bother to try to get beneath the anxiety that is driving people to behave in the way that makes them difficult or disruptive, and you can empathize with it and calm them down. Like if you have somebody who's deeply narcissistic and is constantly having to puff himself up and, talk about themselves and cut you off and take credit for your work, you'd be surprised, just sort of kind of complimenting them or making them feel good about themselves. It'll actually assuage some of the anxiety. They won't feel like they have to prove themselves all the time. And it really helps. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only strategy, but if you can get it, and if you have a micromanager, the anxiety is they're going to lose control. So give them control. Mm-hmm. As much as you can. Mm-hmm. And if you get underneath these anxieties, it can be very helpful.
Wow. And so in your book, you go through each of these kind of personalities or the ones that you've seen the most or you think are most prevalent in the workplace today.
Yeah.
Have you thought about the millennial angle, or is that...
No, I have not defined it by any of those types of things. Again, I'm coming at this from a psychopathology standpoint, and so that would matter less than sort of the trait picture that the person is bringing in. It's still categorizable.
Okay. Okay, we have a few questions here. We have Kate asked, what is the most common complaint that you hear from employees and from managers?
The most common complaint? Mm-hmm. You mean about a particular person, maybe, or?
I believe that would probably be.
I think the most common character type that comes to me is the Narcissus type, the one I've named Narcissus, which is, of course, the sort of, entitled, self-centered, my way or the highway kind of character. They really vex people quite a bit.
That's tough.
Yeah. Common. Tough.
Yeah. Okay, we've hit our 15-minute mark, but we do have a few more questions here. And again, if you guys want to submit your questions, we will get through a few more before we have to wrap. So be sure to send them in. We have, how do you deal with passive-aggressive people at the workplace?
That's so hard. That's without question the hardest one. Like I said, those are the ones that you're like, you don't even know what happened to you. Mm-hmm. And these are the people who, they know where the line is, and they literally dance at the line. And they know how to not cross it, but they stay right there. And so they're kind of like wet rats. You can't get their hands because they always squeeze right out. And I think that the best thing to do, if you can do it, is to let them know that they're doing it, because they know too. And the first thing to do is have the wherewithal and the self-esteem to recognize that it's happening. Give yourself permission to recognize that they aren't just being passive. They're being passive-aggressive.
What is passive-aggressive, I guess? That might help too.
So damning someone by faint praise might be a passive-aggressive, complimenting you, but while I'm complimenting you, I'm also insulting you at the same time. Sort of mixing the negative and the positive together, so that you walk away saying, wait, that really wasn't a very nice, even though that person was smiling when they said that wasn't really a very nice thing that they just said to me.
So maybe like sarcasm?
Sarcasm can absolutely be a passive-aggressive way to interact. Like I said, it's so much easier when someone just screams or throws something. But the passive aggressivity is very difficult. And what I tend to do is when somebody makes a passive-aggressive comment, and again, obviously I'm very direct, is I'll say, what you just said may have sounded like a compliment, but I actually know that it was not a compliment, so thank you very much. And, when you call it out in these ways, it's sort of like, oh, I'm caught, and they're a little bit less likely to do it the next time.
Okay, that's great advice. All right, we are at the 20-minute mark. I guess we'll get to one more question. We have, what was the writing and editing process like for you?
That was the sort of the hardest part because, as you know, I have a pretty busy full-time job, and Michelle was a resident. So this is a book that was written on napkins between meetings, basically, or in the hotel rooms on vacation, things like that. But I primarily handled the clinical, and Michelle primarily handled the bibliography and the research and the history. And because she's a writer, she kind of made it a book. And so we never worked together. We would do, I would do my thing, send it to her. She would do her thing, send it back, and we did it, chapter by chapter, and that's how it worked.
Wow, that's fantastic. Do you have any advice for some of our writers out there who might be working on something nonfiction, or like you're saying, like an article or something on if they want to do a book? Do you have any advice for them on how to get it going, or how to get inspired by it, or how to do it if they already have a book
So
going?
I don't know. This kind of came to me. It's not my bailiwick, but what I will say is that I certainly have found that people are willing to hear your ideas. And so I just spoke to somebody recently at Wharton who has a complete book, but she has neither an agent nor a publishing house. She's been doing it all by herself, and now she's coming with a complete book and looking for an agent. And the way it works is that you start with a proposal that's sort of a little itty-bitty table of contents blown out a little bit, and then from that blown out table of contents you build a book. Mm-hmm. So there's a real process. And so I think the earlier you can get your ideas and find out from somebody in the field who knows what will and won't fly, so that you don't waste your efforts, is probably a good way to proceed.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And for our audience out there, you can buy the Schmuck in My Office. Where can they buy this book?
They can buy it ideally anywhere.
Anywhere, yeah.
But certainly Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere.
Okay, so anywhere. And then to keep up with Dr. Jody Foster, you can go to her website. That is
schmuckinmyoffice.com.
schmuckinmyoffice.com. And she's not on social media, so you cannot find her there. But if you have questions for her, you can message them to us, and we will make sure that we get them to her. Thank you guys again, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And you guys have a good one.